Shalom, and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet, Highland Park, New Jersey. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Long Island, Solomon Schechter Day School, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City. It's great to see you guys. We have so much to talk about, but first, we have a couple of shout-outs. Shout-out number one, we are thinking about our fellow Jews in Colleyville and, of course, all around the country, trying to process the latest information and the latest situation for us all. A word on that from Large Synagogue and Medium Synagogue. Rabbi Kalmanovsky, going to have a chair on the bima?
I don't know what we're going to do, but we're certainly, I have tremendous respect for the people in Colleyville and the resourcefulness of the well-trained. We've also been through safety training, but I don't know that I would have had the presence of mind. Probably would not have had the presence of mind to clap the guy with the chair and escape. That Charlie Citron Walker, the rabbi there, a gigantic yasher koach to them, and I just the continued horror that too many people in the United States, we've had attacks from white supremacist Nazi types. This is an Al Qaeda type or an ISIS type. But they all think that Jews run the world, and we have not successfully disabused them of thinking that a small synagogue in Texas has no power over releasing terrorists.
Okay, obviously, this is anti-Semitism is a problem of anti-Semites, and there's lots to say on that. Of course, we're going to shift for a moment and give a shout out to my daughter's having a birthday, Nama. Happy birthday tomorrow.
And happy birthday, Nama.
I want to say big shout out to Galit.
We want to appreciate Galit's dedication to Torah study and her inventive interpretation of Nachmanides and Rashi.
But Yitro is a huge parsha. I would say among the 54 parshas, it's really one of the most amazing of the 54 amazing parshas. Okay. We are not going to talk about Yitro at the beginning, that remarkable personality. If you want to talk about allyship, right, being an ally to the Jewish people, just 2 seconds on this. There's no greater ally to the people of Israel than Yitro. Yitro really experiences with solidarity and joy the redemption of the Jewish people, redemption of the people of Israel. I don't want to be too anachronistic here, but there's something to be said. We love him because he loves us, right? I mean, Yitro is a formative character, a paradigm of the kind of ally that you want among Gentiles. And so he teaches Moses a couple of things. He teaches Moses how to manage his daily life as a leader, as a judge. Delegation. He wants to teach Moses how to delegate responsibility. We get all of that from Yitro.
But I just noticed, by the way, when we were reading Yitro this week in Shul, our listeners certainly know that we read the beginning of each parasha on Monday and Thursday as the week comes up. And we had morning minyan, and the B'nai Mitzvah kids for this upcoming week came in and read the parsha. And I had never really noticed, but just listening to them, the word hitzil, saved, rescued, it is like a note, clanging, resonant note, like a bell ringing in this parsha. I think it probably says 7 or 8 times in the immediate description of Yitro.
Tzil.
Maybe it's ringing like tzil. But it just struck me that literally this is the story that the Torah is telling here in Exodus 18. Rescue, and vayichad Yitro. And Yitro was delighted to hear about this rescue. It's great. Really, exactly what you said.
He's incredible. Really, it's an archetype of the kind of solidarity with our people. We move to chapter 19, and this is the moment that people are now at Sinai. We are now 3 months. We're in the 3rd month from the Exodus. Ba'u midbar Sinai. On that day, they come to the wilderness of Sinai. Vayachanu b'midbar, vayichan sham Yisrael neged hahar. So we see them encamped against the mountain, and of course our commentaries like to make a point of saying they came in plural, Vayichan, Sham, though in singular, they were there as one people. And then it gets a little complicated. Moshe goes up the mountain, and God says to him from the mountain, Kol tomar levet Yisrael v'taged levnei Kol tomar levet Yaakov v'taged levnei Yisrael. Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and speak to the children of Israel. Atem ritem asher asiti Mitzrayim. You saw what I did in Egypt, to Egypt. V'asadchem al kanfei nesharim. I brought you on eagle's wings. V'avietchem elai, and I brought you to me. V'ta'im shomot yishmu el bikoli. If you listen to my voice, ushmartem et briti, and heed my covenant. Vitem li skula. You will be my treasured possession. Mikol amim, among all peoples. Kili kol arts, for the earth is mine. Vatem tiuli mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You'll be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Ela dvarim asher tedaber b'nei Israel. These are the things that you should tell the people of Israel. Now, Jeremy, you and I, we have taught, and I'm going back with a little sentimentality, nostalgia. We teach the Jewish mission, right? Be holy, be a blessing, be holy, choose life. But we could say that this here is the compression of the Jewish mission. I mean, can you give two thoughts about Mamlechet Kohanim and Goy Kadosh or Am Segula? Give it, what's off the top of your head on this? If you have to say to people, what does it mean to be a nation of priests and a Goy Kadosh?
You want to go, Barry?
Oh, well, thank you. I'm struck by the term mamlacha and goy, which are two different words that apparently refer to the same thing. We would call them synonyms, but they really speak to different understandings of how people see themselves as a collective. So the goy kadosh, I think, resonates with us. In modern times, we associate the word goy with non-Jew because of the way that Jewish history took its course. But here, obviously, the nation that is holy is the Jewish nation, the tad anachronistic, the Israelites. And it suggests that the mission really is to be a part of the world of nations, but also to be separate, to be kadosh. That our mission as Jews following the Israelites is to be distinct. And that leads us to the Mamlechet Kohanim, because the distinct person within our collective community is the priest, who is set aside for service to God, according to the different traditions in the Torah. And it allows us to see how we might function in the world. We need to be attuned to service to God, not within, but without. This is how we need to think of how we address the larger world.
So it's like you're saying apart and apart, right? They are simultaneously a part of the world and apart, separate from the world. And I guess in a sense, Mamlechet Kohanim is this intermediary, an understanding of a priest as agent and also teacher, right? Because there is that function of the priesthood in antiquity that the priests had to not only direct the ritual life of the people, but also function as, they were teachers.
Right, and this ties in very nicely with the broader theme of chapter 19, which, as you indicated, there's a lot of running around. Moses, apparently they waited to the third month because Moses had to go into training so he could go up and down the mountain so many times so quickly. But this is the classic position of the prophet, who is the intermediary between God and the people. He takes God's message to the people, and then the people's response back to God, and it requires the prophet to do that because there is not a lot of direct communication from God to the people, or alternatively from the people to God.
I want to add one thing about the Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh. First of all, all the things that you guys have said are quite true about the dynamic of a designated, covenantal people. This is a covenantal ceremony. This, I brought you here. Now let's commit to a certain future. Mamlechet Kohanim, it means those distinct things and those set apart things, but at a certain level, lechahen is to serve, to be a servant, and to serve in this role. Even in modern times, we say somebody serves as the, transportation minister or
Okay,
something like
okay.
that. And the orientation of Am Yisrael, portrayed in this passage as very, very dear to God, Segula, Mikol Ha'amim, the treasured people. You know, I do not, in the 21st century here in the, 2022, I do not think that the Jewish people are the most important people on earth. I think that all people are equal, all peoples are equal, of equal significance. But I also want to say that I think that being Jewish has to have a point. Okay, a lot of times people talk about Jewish survival and we should have continuity. Well, it's got to have a point. It can't just be survive in order to survive. Like every nation, everybody in there, every culture has. We want to keep our culture and we want to keep our traditions because they're quaint and we love them and they're special to us. And in that respect, Judaism is like everything else, and kreplach and wontons and ravioli, and it's all the same thing. We've got our dumplings, they've got their dumplings, we've got klezmer music, and they've got other music. But Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh says you should be a Jew, and it matters whether or not Judaism survives, because we are trying to bring ethical, spiritual, social meaning and teaching to the world.
God.
So when God says, listen, I want you to be Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, the nation of servants, the nation of priests, the sanctified nation, it means that this is the point of your being a nation is dedicated to these, spiritual and ethical and social teachings to share.
I wouldn't even say, this is to bring God's presence into the world. I mean, and in fact, Judaism picks up on this theme, I think, as a central idea in Judaism. Yit Gadal V'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah is about the attempt to magnify and sanctify God's name in the world. By doing that, we bringing God's presence into the world. We are living with the hope that we can shape the world to be the mirror image of God, which is what God wants. And God has decided in the Torah here that the vehicle for doing that is, and the instrumentality of bringing God's message to the world is through the people. And what we are going to experience now is, in fact, how the people receive this message. I just want to make one other highlight here. It's Va'avi etchem elai, I brought you to me. Now, I read this with a great sense of intimacy, that God, if we want to just, shed our inhibitions about anthropomorphism and anthropopathism and deal with it, okay? God is saying, I want you, I want you here. I want you next to me. I want to be with you. I want, and to say it in a different way, I want to break through with a message to you. Okay, I've been doing that already with your ancestors. They got it, okay? But I need you. I want you to have this message. I'm bringing you to me. And we're doing it at this place, and we're doing it specifically at a mountain, because the mountain reflects a reality. It's this world, it's part of this world, and it's a nexus point between this world and what is completely beyond. And I am completely beyond, okay? And so...
Can I just say that when you said about the anthropomorphism, speaking about God in human terms, and anthropopathism, speaking about God's feelings, and it just reminds me, and like, just deal with it, okay? It reminds me that at some level, first of all, I think there's much more to say theologically than just tell the stories of the Tanakh or the Torah. But at some level, this religion, it filters through the God of Israel as described in the Bible. Okay, like what's beautiful about this religion is it gives us a God who has those feelings, who brings you to me. I want to tell you, I want to pierce some of this like infinite distance between heaven and earth, and it's a little hard. I mean, there are ongoing centuries and centuries of theology and different kinds of theological thinkers, and Maimonides is very much unlike the Baal Shem Tov, and different kinds of people speak in different kinds of ways in this, more mystical and more rational. But at some level, you have to be able to be moved by the story of the God who is manifest in loving relationship with this covenantal people. And it's pretty hard to make sense of Judaism at all
without that.
unless you're willing to make those anthropomorphic and anthropopathic maneuvers.
Sure. Okay, so I want to just fast forward. Moses delivers the message that to this he first tells it to the Zikanim and then tells it to the people. Evidently, because the people answer and say, "Yeah, we're in. Naaset. We'll do whatever God says here." And then they're given a series of instructions: 3 days to be ready, wash your clothes, and make a boundary. Okay, and the boundary line is pretty tight. Okay, you cross over the boundary, you're going to be put to death. Okay, the zone of the mountain is a holy zone. Only Moses ostensibly can go up the mountain. The people are going to be outside the zone of the mountain, but they are going to hear something. Okay, and so I'm going to suggest that what God has in mind is, look, I'm going to come down the mountain. I'm going to come down on the mountain. The mountain is going to be like a volcano. It's going to be billowing with smoke. And that's the moment. My presence is so dangerous, okay? And it's at that moment that the message is going to come out. The message of what I want for this people and what I want them to bring to humanity, namely the message encapsulated in Aseret HaDibrot, which we normally translate as the 10 Commandments, but probably ought to be translated as the 10 precepts or 10 statements or 10 utterances, okay? There are 10 utterances, 10 statements here, and that's what I want to bring. And so my proposition to you is to understand this text as what God desires and what doesn't happen. It doesn't happen the way that God wants it, okay? And here, I'm going to read it as follows. I'm reading it without going into the verse-by-verse analysis. See the class if you do this, okay? It's Moses is told to go down to get the people back. And Moses says to God, look, I already told them that. And God says, Lech red, go down, va'alita, but then come back up. Ata v'ronimach, you and Aaron, va'kohanim va'am al yersu, the people and the priests, they're not going to transgress or go over this boundary, okay, lest I destroy them. And so Moses comes down, and then we have the 10 utterances. And they come out, and immediately after that we read, the people see the sound, the torches, the sound of the shofar. The mountain is billowing smoke. The people see this, and they run away. It's too overwhelming for them. And they say to Moses, you talk to us and we will listen. Don't let God speak to us lest we die. And I want to say that this is a kind of rereading of this, because we normally understand this in very romantic terms, that God speaks and we listen. Everybody is not, they're listening like in a spiritual ecstasy. But it's not that at all. The people are terrified. They're scared out of their minds. They want to run away from the mountain. There's no way that they're going to touch the mountain. And they want Moses to intercede. And they don't even hear the 10 Commandments, is what I'm saying. How disappointing must that have been for God? That's my reading here. I'm basing that on Yoram Hazony, a philosopher who's presents that reading in a book and some essays. But
I'm just going to point out that you think that they did not eat Korban Pesach in Egypt, and you think they did not hear the 10 Commandments.
So I want to say parenthetically, it's the joy of this is that we read this over and over, and we all get very committed to our interpretation, very committed to our readings, until, of course,
some of us should just be committed, Elliot.
Well, what's your take on this, Barry? You have a different take on this, and I think it's equally radical.
It's such a problematic parsha, and as you mentioned, we read it a lot and we study it a lot. And we continue to find new things every year. And what strikes me is this word kol that makes its way through the Parsha in different manifestations. One kol is the
Voice.
sound of the shofar.
Shofar. Okay.
And the shofar is nonverbal. We hear it, but we have to interpret what it means, what the sound it makes. The other kol is the voice of Moses. And it strikes me in reading this closely that it's Moses who actually recites the Ten Commandments. At the end of chapter 19, he comes down the mountain and speaks to the people and tells them what God said. And the first thing that God says is Anochi, I. And they hear God through Moses's voice. And again, I think we discussed this a couple weeks ago in Va'era. The job of the prophet is to give voice to God, because God is not heard ordinarily. His message must be delivered in the voice of a human being. And that is Moses. And, listening to you talk before we were recording and now, the fear that you mentioned is overwhelming, but what is its source? Why are the people so afraid? And it occurs to me that from everything that they know about God, they're not quite sure that this is a God of life. And that's what scares them, because this God has brought much destruction in his wake. They did not, take the vacation package out of Egypt. They were delivered in a different way. And when they cross the Sea of Reeds, as they did last week, when they turn around, they see death.
Right.
And, you had said before that the people were scared to death, and they're also scared of death. And, it's hard to trust this God. And I think they're trying their best, and they're very confused. And what ultimately comes of this scene in Yitro is that they learn that the one they have to trust is Moshe.
Indeed, indeed. I just want to pick up on that, and Jeremy, I don't know if you're building up something, but so it's the Esh Ochelet. Okay, later on in Mashpatim, we'll get Esh Ochelet, the idea that God is a consuming fire, and we get that in different passages. And that it's the interesting thing that Moshe experiences the first time that he encounters God is Vasne Enenu Ukal, that the fire that is burning this fragile bush is not consuming it. And so here, this is Hazoni's, his interpretation. I like this interpretation very much. He's saying, look, God is necessary to the world. God sustains the world like fire. It's the metaphor. You need fire, but fire is also dangerous. God is dangerous. The biblical reality, the biblical experience of God is that exactly what you said, Barry. It's overwhelming, it's dangerous. And Moses' vision is that this presence, this dangerous presence, can actually be tamed and live within a person, can live within a community, can live within a people, and it can be transmitted to others and not be destructive. So we have to understand that getting too close to God can be completely dangerous and kill you, but getting something can sustain you. The bush was not consumed is a metaphor for the human being and for community and for the people, and that the people lives with this fire that they're going to manage to control, and they'll manage to control both physically in a physical manifestation in the Beit HaMikdash or the sanctuary, and also through what will become Torah. That's the idea here.
To me, this is instantiated what we're talking about now in terms of what can the people handle. They need to hear something through a human intermediary. If everything is through the human intermediary, is that religion, or is that just purely secularity? We cannot have the divine unmediated by the human intelligence, the human recipient. Everything, the divine mind is, if you're a believing person, if you're a theologically thinking person, the divine mind is unconditioned, infinite, outside of time, and gets refracted through the human recipients, which turn it into, on the 14th day of Nisan, you do this, and on every sixth day, you do every seventh day, you do that. And those things are time bound and they are culturally bound. And so to me, one of the ways this is symbolized, and we can talk about the way in which the divine just overwhelms people until they're just completely scorched, till they all get the Nadav and Avihu treatment of having become so close that, or how do we modulate it such that people can receive it? To me, this is illustrated, among other things, by the fact that the first two commandments show up in the first person speaker. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am the Lord your God. Lo yeh lecha elohim acherim al panai, no other gods before me. And the speaker is clearly the first person divine. And then by the third one is Lo tisa et shem Adonai Elohecha lashav, ki lo yinaket asher yisa et shemo lashav. Do not take the Lord's name in vain, for he will not cleanse those who take his name in vain. We've moved to a third person. So like a midrashic way of reading this is that they heard two commandments, mipi hagvura, directly from the divine mouth. And then the other 611 were through the mediation of Moshe. Rambam reports a tremendous, I don't remember where the source is, he reports a tremendously interesting midrash in the Guide for the Perplexed, in which he says that they heard those first two sort of as indistinct rumbles, not broken out into clear words, because the divine speech couldn't be, exactly like ordinary intelligible human speech. So I like that, because to me, it speaks to the religious need to both have something that is divine, that is not just the stuff that human beings come up with, but that the reality is that the vast majority of religion does have to be accommodated to the human recipient and the human interpreter.
So I want to say that I think it's a frustrating moment for an ordinary Israelite. Okay, you want this. You're terrified of this. It's overwhelming. The content of the commandment is over. What you just did, Jeremy, it's great, because this is what Talmud Torah is about. This is, you're teaching Torah. I did a course on the Ten Commandments, and the real idea was you think you know this, okay? You think, because everyone says, yeah, I keep the Ten Commandments, but people haven't really understood this, and I get the sense that our community can identify with the Israelites here, because in a way we're, you're going to be in shul on Shabbos, you're going to hear the command, you're going to hear the statements come out, and it's like, well, what does this mean? What's the mean? It's overwhelming. Okay, Barry, you had a great interpretation of Shabbat. We're running out of time, so let's give our listeners and viewers, this idea of Shabbat and encoded in the Ten Commandments. And the commandment for Shabbat is an astonishing message, which is not completely discernible on the first go-round. Go ahead.
So the fourth commandment is a command to remember Shabbat, and we remember Shabbat as in the language of Exodus in order to remember creation, that God rested on the seventh day. And it occurred to me that there are two ways in which human beings are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. In the first chapter of Breshit, of Genesis, they're told to rule over the earth. And our teacher, Rabbi Neil Gilman, Zichrono Livracha, said that this was his understanding of what B'Tselem Elohim meant, that just as God rules over the universe, human beings rule over the universe as well.
Power.
But the fourth commandment actually gives us another way to be B'Tselem Elohim, and that is we observe Shabbat just like God observed Shabbat. And it gives us a great insight, I think, into the biblical mind, because in order to truly be in God's image, we must work for 6 days, but we also must rest on Shabbat. We give up everything that we do that exerts power over the world on Shabbat in order to be like God. But we can only do that if we have exerted that power through the first 6 days of the week.
So in other words, being an image of God is to live, to do Shabbat is to live as the image of God, and to work is to live as the image of God. And we are basically going between both of those manifestations, basically.
Yeah.
Right. What a great idea. I think it just underscores the fact that reading this text over and over again, it never ceases to yield meaning for us as the basic cornerstone of not only what it means to be a Mamlechet Kohanim and Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, but really also to have this connection to God and to present these teachings as a foundation of world civilization. Jeremy, any closing out ideas here? Just as this, I mean, do you concur with this idea that it's a mess for them? I mean, or what do we take with us from this parsha?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a mess for them, and I'm sort of caught between thinking that it's a very vivid illustration of the reality that the divine is incommensurate, like what I said about the filtering the divine through the human recipient is always going to be imperfect and more than we can handle. And I'm sort of caught between thinking, yeah, what a beautiful illustration of the religious truth when the people want to run away and say, I don't want to listen anymore, no more divine revelation. I'm caught between thinking that is an excellent illustration of the reality that the divine does not really belong on earth and in human society in a simple and unambiguous way. It's always going to be a little bit complicated and rough-edged, and kind of feeling that it's a failure of nerve and cowardice on the part of the people, that it's just that they're not ready, that Hashem is prepared to close the gap more than the people are prepared to have the gap closed, that it's a little safer and easier if we would please tell God to leave us alone. We're nomadic sheep herders. We're in the desert. Will you please leave us alone a little bit?
So I mentioned this in a class. I said, we read this parsha. Our friends are going to read this parsha, this Shabbat, and if you're in shul and if you're at home, you're going to rise. That's the custom in the shul. And you rise to listen to the commandments, the statements, right? And traditionally we understand that we are reenacting Ma'amad Har Sinai by standing and listening. But I said, if we really wanted to reenact it, we'd run out the door. Right? That's what we would do.
But it's important to recognize that we're not really reenacting it. What we're claiming is that today is Mount Sinai. And that it's not that we're going back in time, but we're bringing Sinai to wherever we hear the Ten Commandments.
So you are reshaping the understanding of Sinai. And you're doing typically what the Torah, the biblical tradition does, and what the rabbinic tradition does. It takes this moment and basically purges out of it the terror from it and makes it the moment of contact, which of course it is. And standing in shul to receive the statements is a way of, it's an aspirational moment. We're doing that as aspiring to be there as if we could hear it, to kind of do a do-over, right? We are Klal Yisrael, and we want a do-over of the Ma'amad Har Sinai because our ancestors were too terrified to stand there. I think that's compelling. What do you think?
We want the do-over, but this is like on another level. People want the intense spirituality. They want the juice of religion. They want that electric feeling. And they kind of don't want some of the scary stuff like, oh yeah, we want to hear the prophetic voice of our religious leaders. Okay, the prophet stands up and says, Ko Amar Adonai, God told me the following thing. And you say, okay, we're going to bring the ambulance and we're going to give you a little antipsychotic. So it's true. We want to reenact Ma'amad Har Sinai because we're going to read it out of a 2,500-year-old or 3,000-year-old scroll, okay, and not that the mountain is quaking. Ge'eshen hakivshan, that would scare the pants off us.
Exactly. We're doing it out of love, which is it's as if it's Vaviet Chamelai. We want to be there. let's be in the divine embrace together. And that is how I think we should end our conversation. That reading this, studying this, and re-chanting it in shul is an attempt, as it were, to enter the divine embrace and to imbibe the content of that moment at Sinai. So, for everyone, for all of us, let's say good Shabbos to our listeners. Thank you so much
Shabbat
for
Shalom.
being with us. Shabbat
Good
Shalom.
Shabbos.
We are so happy to have this time, and see you next week on another edition of Parsha Talk.